The grand hall of the Draconic Council was massive, with walls that stretched up into shadow. Kessida stood in the center, her green scales catching the light as she held her egg close to her chest. The egg was warm and she could feel it moving inside. Her baby was alive, waiting to meet the world. But the council was angry. "You broke the law," the eldest dragon said, his voice booming like thunder. "The breeding season ended 3 weeks ago. You knew this. Every dragon knows this. Yet you chose to ignore our rules and create life outside the proper time." Kessida's heart pounded. She tried to explain. The breeding season was supposed to happen in spring, but her egg had come early. She hadn't meant to break the rules. Just happened. But the council didn't want to hear her reasons. "Exile," another council member declared coldly. "Immediate deportation. You and your egg will leave this world today. You are no longer welcome here." The words hit Kessida like a physical blow. Exile meant death. It meant being thrown into the cold emptiness of space with no one to help her, no supplies, nowhere to go. She looked down at her egg. This tiny life had done nothing wrong, yet it would suffer because of her mistake. Guards came forward, big, mean-looking dragons with hard eyes. They didn't speak to her. They just grabbed her arms and started dragging her toward the exit. Kessida didn't resist. What was the point? The council had decided. On her world, the council's word was law, and no one questioned law. They took her to a transport ship, old and barely functional. The inside was dark and cold. A guard shoved her inside and sealed the door. Kessida sat alone in that empty metal box, holding her egg as the ship lifted off the ground. Through a small window, she watched her entire world disappear below her. Then everything went wrong. The ship's system started making terrible sounds, beeping and grinding noises that made Kessida's stomach twist. Red warning lights flashed on the control panel. The ship shook violently, and Kessida realized the navigation computer was broken. The ship wasn't just flying randomly, it was falling, tumbling through space like a wounded bird. Alarms screamed inside the metal walls. Kessida held her egg tight and tried to protect it as the ship spun faster and faster. She could hear something cracking, maybe the hull, maybe her bones, maybe both. The noise was deafening. Then came the crash. The ship hit something hard and the world exploded into chaos. Sparks flew everywhere. Metal twisted and groaned. Kessida was thrown across the small cabin, slamming into walls. Her egg flew from her arms and for one horrible second she thought she'd lost it forever. But her tail caught it and she pulled it back to her chest. When everything finally stopped, there was only silence. Kessida pulled herself up slowly. Her body ached and she was bleeding from several cuts on her scales. But she was alive. She looked at her egg carefully. It was still moving. Still alive. That was something. She crawled toward the window and looked outside. They had crashed on some kind of station. A massive structure floating in space, covered in mining equipment and broken solar panels. It looked dead, abandoned, like no one had been here in years. There was no city, no civilization. Just metal and darkness and cold. Kessida stumbled out of the broken ship, carrying her egg. The station was freezing. The corridors were dark except for emergency lights that flickered on and off like dying heartbeats. She moved through hallway after hallway, searching for somewhere warm, somewhere safe. Hours passed. Her egg was getting colder. She could feel it through her scales. That warm, living sensation was fading into something colder and more still. Panic rose in her chest. On her world, dragons kept their eggs warm naturally, wrapping them in their bodies in their heat. But this place was too cold. Even her warmth wasn't enough. She tried wrapping the egg tightly in her wings. That helped a little but not enough. She searched every room on the station looking for anything that could provide heat. Some old machinery, broken equipment, empty storage containers. Nothing useful. As the hours dragged on, Kessida felt despair creeping in. The egg was moving less now. She could barely feel it at all. The oxygen in the station was thin too. Her lungs hurt. The life support systems were failing, and everything was getting colder and colder. Kessida curled herself into a ball around her egg in the center of the main room. This was it. This was how it would end. She had failed her baby before it even got to take its first breath. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. She closed her eyes and waited for the end. Then, somewhere in the darkness, a door hissed open. The light from the airlock was blinding after so much darkness. Kessida jerked her head up, her body tensing, ready to attack or flee. She'd heard stories about humans, strange creatures from distant planets who didn't follow the rules of civilization. They were unpredictable, dangerous. And now one was walking straight toward her. The human was tall but not as tall as a dragon. He wore a thick suit covered in patches and stains, and he carried a metal box in one hand. His face was weathered, with lines around his eyes that suggested he'd spent a lot of time squinting at broken things. He had the look of someone who fixed things for a living, not someone who solved problems with violence. Cressida spread her wings slightly, a warning. "Stay back, human. I don't want trouble." But the human didn't seem scared. He just stopped a few feet away and looked at her carefully. His eyes moved from her face to her egg to the broken equipment scattered around her. It was like he was reading a language she didn't understand. "Okay, so here's what I'm seeing," the human said, his voice calm and steady. "You've got a dragon. You've got an egg. The egg's cold. Really cold. And you're stuck on a station that's basically falling apart." He pulled out a small device that looked like a gun but wasn't. It had a screen on it. "Your egg's got a temperature problem. That's the real issue here." Cressida stared at him. This human was talking to her like she was just another broken machine to fix. He wasn't terrified. He wasn't trying to capture her or kill her. He was just analyzing the situation. "Of course the egg is cold," Cressida said, frustrated. "This entire station is freezing. I've tried everything. Nothing works." The human nodded like she'd just confirmed something he already suspected. He pointed the device at the egg and it made a soft beeping sound. Numbers appeared on the small screen. The human studied those numbers for a moment, then looked around the station, thinking hard. "Here's the thing," he said, turning back to her. "An egg that cold doesn't mean it's dead. Not yet. Temperature problems are usually fixable. I've been working as a maintenance engineer for 15 years. Believe me, I've seen way worse situations than this." He looked at her directly. "But I need to know what your egg actually needs. Give me the specifics. The exact temperature range. The humidity. The oxygen levels. Everything. If you tell me, I might be able to help." Cressida wanted to believe him. She really did. But believing meant hoping, and hope was dangerous. Still, what choice did she have? Her egg was dying. This strange human was offering to help. There was nothing to lose anymore. "The egg needs to stay between 43 and 45 degrees Celsius, she explained, her voice shaking slightly. "The air needs to be humid, around 60 to 70%. And it needs oxygen but not too much. And it needs to be in darkness, mostly with just a little light now and then." The human listened carefully, nodding along. He didn't interrupt or question her. He just listened and thought. When she finished, he looked around the station, his eyes moving from one piece of equipment to another. "Yeah, I can work with this," he said finally. Those 5 words changed everything. The human introduced himself as Riley. He explained that he'd been sent to the station for a routine maintenance job, checking the old mining equipment and making sure the backup systems were still functional. He wasn't supposed to find a dragon and a dying egg. But that was okay. Riley seemed like the kind of person who was good at dealing with unexpected problems. "First thing," Riley said, walking around the station's central hub, "we need to understand what we've got to work with. The station's power systems are mostly shot, but there's still some juice in the thermal generators over in Section 3. The life support is running on fumes, but it's running. And there's enough scrap metal and old equipment around here to build pretty much anything if we get creative." Cressida followed him, still holding her egg carefully. She wanted to understand his plan, but mostly she wanted to see if he was actually serious or if he would change his mind once he realized how much work this would be. Riley walked into a large room filled with mining equipment. Big machines that looked like they hadn't been used in years. Dust covered everything. He started pointing at different pieces, already imagining something new. "See, the problem isn't that we can't create heat," Riley explained. "We can. We've got thermal vents running through the station's walls. The problem is controlling that heat. Making it consistent. Making it safe for your egg." He turned to look at Cressida. "But if we can tap into those vents and route the heat through some kind of chamber, regulate the temperature with the life support systems, monitor the humidity, yeah, we could do this." He pulled out a small notebook from his pocket and started sketching rough designs. His hands moved quickly and his mind seemed to be working even faster. He was excited now, like this was a puzzle he actually wanted to solve. "Here's what I need from you," Riley said, looking up from his sketches. "I need you to be honest with me about what happens if we fail. I need you to tell me if there are things I don't know about dragon eggs that might mess this up. And I need you to be prepared to help me if something goes wrong. Can you do that?" Cressida nodded slowly. For the first time since her exile began, she felt something other than despair. She felt something that might be hope. Riley didn't sleep for 3 days straight. Cressida watched him work, amazed by his determination. He moved through the station like a man possessed, pulling apart old machines, rewiring cables, and rerouting pipes that hadn't been used in years. His hands were constantly dirty, covered in grease and dust. His eyes were red from exhaustion, but he kept going. The first thing Riley did was locate the thermal vents that ran beneath the station's main structure. He used an old map he found in the maintenance office to trace where they went. The vents carried hot water from the station's geothermal core, leftover heat that the mining operations used to have. Those vents were still active, still pumping heat through the walls, even though nobody was using them anymore. Perfect, Riley muttered, studying the maps by flashlight. We can tap into these without destroying anything critical. He gathered tools from the station's old maintenance bay, things that hadn't been touched in probably decades. Most of them worked. Some didn't. Riley fixed the ones that didn't, or he improvised with other equipment until he had what he needed. The second day he started building the actual incubator. Riley chose a large metal chamber that used to be part of the mining operations cooling system. He cleared it out, cleaned it as best he could, and began modifying it. He ran thermal pipes through it, connecting them to the main heating system. He installed temperature gauges that he salvaged from old equipment and rewired to work with the station's failing power grid. Cressida stayed close, watching everything. She didn't fully understand what Riley was doing, but she could see the logic in it. On her home world, if something broke, you reported it to the council's engineers. They had approved procedures, approved methods, approved solutions. If those didn't work, then the problem couldn't be solved. It was that simple. But Riley didn't believe in that kind of limitation. When one solution didn't work, he tried another. When equipment was broken, he fixed it or replaced it with something else. When a pipe was too small, he used a bigger one. When the temperature reading was off, he adjusted the system until it was right. He wasn't following a rulebook. He was making up solutions as he went. On the third day, Riley connected the life support system to the incubator chamber. This was the critical part. The life support needed to control the air inside the chamber, the oxygen levels, the humidity, everything. Riley had to reprogram the system's old computer, which meant sitting in front of a flickering screen, typing in code he'd memorized from years of maintenance work. Cressida brought him water when she saw him getting thirsty. He drank it without really noticing, too focused on his work. She found some of his ration bars in his emergency kit, compressed food that didn't taste like much, and left them nearby. He ate a few bites between tasks, also barely noticing. By the late evening of the third day, Riley was finishing the final connections. His hands were shaking slightly from exhaustion, but his eyes were sharp. He made one last adjustment to a valve, then sat back. Okay, he said quietly. I think it's ready. We should test it. They didn't need to test it on the egg first. Cressida brought her egg to the incubator chamber slowly, carefully. Riley had lined the inside with soft padding he'd made from old cloth and insulation material. The chamber was warm inside, not too hot, not too cold. It felt right. Put it in, Riley said. Gently. Let's see if this actually works. Cressida placed her egg in the center of the chamber. The moment it was inside, the incubator hummed to life. The temperature gauge showed 44 degrees Celsius. The humidity monitor showed 65%. The oxygen levels were perfect. Cressida closed her eyes. For the first time in days, she felt her baby's presence clearly, that warm, alive sensation she'd been missing. The egg was safe. It was warm. It was going to live. She opened her eyes and looked at Riley. How did you do this? Riley laughed, a tired, exhausted sound. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of grease across his skin. Honestly? I have no idea. I just kept trying things until something worked. Cressida sat down beside the incubator chamber, unable to take her eyes off her egg. On my world, this would be impossible. There are no resources. There is no equipment. There are no humans. We would say it cannot be done. Yeah, well, Riley said, collapsing into a nearby chair, humans are pretty good at doing things that can't be done. It's kind of our thing. As the hours passed, they spent more time together. Riley would check on the incubator every few minutes, making tiny adjustments, fine-tuning the temperature and humidity. Cressida would sit nearby, watching her egg, watching Riley work. They didn't talk much. There wasn't really anything to say. But something was changing between them. It wasn't friendship exactly, not yet. It was something more fundamental. A shared understanding that sometimes the most important things in life are worth breaking the rules for. Cressida finally asked the question that had been on her mind since the beginning. Why are you doing this, Riley? I'm not your kind. My egg is not your concern. You could leave. You could report this to your people and let them decide what to do. Why do you stay? Why do you help me? Riley was quiet for a long moment. He stared at the incubator chamber, watching the egg inside. "Because your egg deserves a chance," he said finally. "That's really the only reason I need. I fix things because they deserve to work. I help people because they deserve help. Your baby didn't choose to be born in the wrong season. It didn't choose exile. It just deserves to live. Same reason I fix anything." Quesada understood then. This human wasn't following rules or traditions or the will of any council. He was following something deeper, something about the value of life itself. Something about the belief that impossible things could be made possible if you just refused to accept defeat. On the 5th day after the incubator was completed, something changed. Quesada was sitting beside the chamber, as she had been almost constantly, when she felt it. A vibration. A movement inside the egg that was different from before. More purposeful. More urgent. Her heart started beating faster. "Riley," she called out, her voice shaking. "Something's happening." Riley came running from the other side of the station. He'd been trying to repair some of the auxiliary power systems to give them more energy stability, but he dropped everything the moment Quesada called. He was always ready. Always watching for the moment when his work would either pay off or fail completely. "Is it time?" Riley asked, moving closer to the incubator chamber. "I think so," Quesada whispered. "I can feel it. The baby is trying to get out." They both fell silent, watching the egg carefully. The temperature gauges showed everything was perfect. The humidity was exactly right. The oxygen levels were ideal. Everything Riley had built was working exactly as he designed it. Then they saw it. A thin line appeared on the surface of the egg. Just a crack, barely visible at first. Then another line appeared, crossing the first one. The cracks were growing, spreading like lightning across the shell. Quesada's breath caught in her throat. This was it. After everything, the exile, the crash, the desperate search for warmth, Riley's impossible work, this was finally happening. The baby dragon was fighting its way out. The cracks continued to spread. Pieces of shell started falling away. Inside they could see movement, a small head covered in wet scales pushing against the remaining shell. The hatchling was struggling, using a small horn on its nose to break through the barrier that had protected it for so long. "Come on, little one," Riley whispered, as if encouraging a machine to turn over and start working. "You can do this." The hatchling pushed harder. More shell fell away. Its tiny claws scraped against the inside of the egg, searching for purchase, searching for a way out. It was a fight for survival, and it was happening right in front of them. Quesada watched with tears streaming down her face. She had been in exile for such a short time, but it had felt like forever. Her entire world had been reduced to one goal, keeping this egg alive. And now, after everything, her baby was coming. The hatchling struggled for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The effort was clearly exhausting for such a small creature. It would push hard, make progress, then seem to pause and rest. Then it would push again. Quesada wanted to help. Every instinct told her to reach in and pull the shell away to make it easier for her baby. But Riley gently put a hand on her arm. "Let it do this," he said quietly. "The struggle is part of it. It needs to build strength. If we do it for the hatchling, we might hurt it." So Quesada waited, watching her baby fight its way into the world. Then, suddenly, the last piece of shell gave way. The hatchling tumbled out onto the soft padding Riley had arranged inside the chamber. It was wet and covered in the fluid from inside the egg. It was the smallest dragon Quesada had ever seen, barely larger than Riley's hand. Its scales were pale, almost translucent in places, and they glistened with moisture. And then, nothing. The hatchling lay there, not moving. Not breathing. Quesada's joy turned to ice-cold terror. Something was wrong. Something had gone horribly, terribly wrong. She looked at Riley with panic in her eyes. Why isn't it breathing? Why isn't it moving? But Riley was already moving. He stepped closer to the incubator chamber and studied the gauges on the life support system. His eyes went to one of the oxygen readings and he frowned. "The oxygen balance is off," he said, more to himself than to Quesada. "It's not quite right for a newborn. The hatchling needs more oxygen right now, just for the first few minutes." Without hesitation, Riley reached over and adjusted one of the valves he'd installed. His hands moved with practiced precision, even though he was working with equipment he'd essentially invented for a situation he'd never encountered before. Air flowed into the chamber. Different air. Better air. Air that a newborn dragon's lungs could actually use. And then the hatchling gasped. It was a small sound, barely audible, but it was the most beautiful thing Quesada had ever heard in her entire life. The baby dragon's tiny chest expanded as it drew in air. Its pale scales darkened slightly as blood flowed through them. Its eyes flickered open, tiny slits of gold that looked up at nothing in particular. It was alive. The hatchling gasped again and then a third time. Each breath came easier than the last. Its small claws flexed. Its tiny tail twitched. And then, impossibly, it released a sound, a high-pitched chirp that was a miniature version of a dragon's roar. Cressida made a sound that was somewhere between a roar and a song and a cry. Tears poured down her face as she watched her baby take its first real breaths. She looked at Riley and there were tears in his eyes too. "You did it," Cressida said, her voice shaking with emotion. "You actually did it? You saved my baby." Riley shook his head, watching the hatchling continue to breathe and move. "We did it. You brought me the problem. I just fixed it." But Cressida knew it was more than that. Riley had done something impossible. He had taken broken equipment and his own knowledge and his sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat, and he had created life where there should have been only death. The hatchling continued to strengthen. Within minutes, it was moving around the incubator chamber, exploring this new world it had just entered. It was clumsy and uncertain, but it was alive. It was healthy. It was going to survive. Cressida reached out very carefully and touched her baby's tiny head. The scales were warm now, alive with the heat flowing through them. The hatchling looked up at her, and though she knew it couldn't see her clearly yet, she felt a connection. "Welcome to the world, little one," she whispered. She turned to look at Riley, and in that moment something changed between them. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was respect. It was the recognition that Riley possessed something her entire civilization lacked: the ability to look at impossible odds and refuse to accept them. Her people followed rules. Riley broke them. Her people said certain things couldn't be done. Riley did them anyway. And because of that fundamental difference between them, a new life had entered the universe. The message came through 3 weeks after Ember was born. It appeared on the station's old communication system, encrypted with the Draconic Council's seal. Cressida stared at the screen, knowing what it said before she even opened it. The Council wanted her back. They wanted her to explain herself. They wanted her egg, though they probably didn't know it had already hatched. Riley stood beside her as she read the words. "Return to your homeworld immediately. Failure to comply will result in permanent exile and the seizure of your offspring for council evaluation. You have 72 hours. Cressida didn't hesitate. She deleted the message. "They're not going to like that," Riley said, but he was smiling slightly. "Let them not like it," Cressida replied. "I'm done following their rules." Something shifted on Station Omega that day. Word spread, somehow through channels that neither Riley nor Cressida fully understood, that there was a place where dragons could be free. A place where the council's rules didn't matter. A place where a dragon could break the breeding laws and her egg would be protected. The first dragon arrived 2 months later. Her name was Vex, and she had been exiled for refusing to breed on schedule. The council had said she was too old, that her genetics were inferior, that she didn't deserve to have children. Vex had disagreed, and the council had responded the only way they knew how, by throwing her into space. Riley saw her ship coming and immediately started preparing. He knew what would happen, he'd done it before. But this time he had help. Cressida worked alongside him, using knowledge from her own exile to anticipate what Vex would need. After Vex came Thorn, a young dragon who had fallen in love with another dragon of the wrong genetic line. The council disapproved of the match, so they exiled them both. Then came Sora, who had simply questioned why the breeding laws existed in the first place. Then Kale, who had wanted to pursue art instead of reproduction. Then Drax, who had loved someone the council deemed unfit. Each exile arrived broken and desperate. Each one found Station Omega and found something they hadn't expected: hope. Riley's colleague Patricia arrived during the 3rd month. She was an engineer like Riley but specialized in solar power systems. She'd heard Riley's story, he'd called her from the station with an update, and she'd asked for a transfer. When she arrived and saw what was happening on Station Omega, she immediately understood. "This is incredible," Patricia said, watching Cressida and Vex working together to expand the living quarters. "You've built a society from nothing." "We're just trying to survive," Riley said. "But yeah, I guess it's becoming something more than that." A pilot named Trevor joined them next, then his partner David, who was a doctor. Trevor flew supply runs to nearby space stations, trading salvaged equipment for food and medicine. David helped keep everyone healthy. More humans arrived, drawn by the story, drawn by the idea of building something new. By Ember's 2nd year, Station Omega was unrecognizable from what it had been. The old mining equipment had been repurposed and rebuilt. Solar arrays covered the outer surface of the station, providing clean energy. The living quarters had been expanded and made comfortable. There were gardens now, real plants growing in hydroponic systems that Patricia had designed and built. There was a school where young dragons learned both traditional dragon knowledge and human engineering. And at the center of it all was Ember. Kessida's hatchling had grown into something extraordinary. Unlike pure dragons raised on the homeworld, Ember had been exposed to human thinking from birth. It had learned to solve problems the way humans did, through experimentation, through trial and error, through the willingness to try new approaches. By its second year, Ember could use its claws to repair delicate circuit boards. It understood mechanical systems in a way that pure dragons never could. But it also understood tradition, understood the old ways, understood the cultural history of its people. Ember existed in both worlds, comfortable in either. One afternoon, Riley stood watching Ember work with Patricia on a solar array installation. The young dragon was carefully connecting power cables while Patricia guided it through the process. Ember moved with precision and confidence, understanding both the practical mechanics and the theoretical principles behind what they were doing. "This is what it looks like when you stop being afraid of change," Patricia said, coming to stand beside Riley. "Yeah," Riley agreed. "This is what it looks like when you realize that the best solutions come from mixing different ways of thinking." Over the following months, more dragons arrived. Some came alone. Some came in pairs or small groups. Each one had been exiled for the crime of being different, for breaking rules, for wanting something the council didn't approve of. And each one found on Station Omega a place where they could be themselves. The council, predictably, was furious. They sent ships. Riley and the other humans helped the dragons evacuate the refugees, rerouting the incoming vessels to other hidden stations in the outer regions. The council threatened sanctions. They declared Station Omega a rogue outpost. They issued warrants for capture. And none of it mattered. Because on Station Omega, a new kind of society was being born. A society where dragons and humans worked side by side. Where rules existed to protect life, not to control it. Where innovation was celebrated. Where the impossible was just another problem waiting to be solved. Kessida watched her people, because that's what they had become, her people, build something better than what they'd left behind. She watched young dragons learn from human engineers. She watched exiled dragons find purpose and community. She watched Ember grow into a bridge between two worlds. One evening, as the twin moons of the system rose over the station, Kessida found Riley on the observation deck. He was looking out at the stars, at the vast emptiness of space that had tried so hard to kill them all. "Thank you," Kessida said simply. Riley turned to look at her. "For what?" "For not accepting the impossible. For showing us that rules can be broken if they're unjust. For believing that a dragon's egg was worth saving, even when it seemed hopeless." Riley smiled. "That's just what humans do. We see something that needs fixing and we fix it. We see something that seems impossible and we try anyway. Sometimes we fail. But sometimes." He gestured at the station around them, at the dragons and humans working together in perfect harmony. "Sometimes we create something beautiful." Ember appeared then, landing on the observation deck with the grace of a young dragon learning to master its wings. It settled beside Kessida and she put her arm around it. "What are you two thinking about?" the young dragon asked, its voice containing echoes of both its mother's traditional dragon speech and the more casual human way of communicating it had learned from Riley. "About the future," Riley said. "About what we're going to build next." And in that moment, looking at the dragon hatchling who existed in both worlds, who understood both tradition and innovation, Kessida realized something fundamental. The Draconic Council had believed that exile was the ultimate punishment. They had believed that throwing someone away meant erasing them from existence. They had been wrong. Exile had led to discovery. Desperation had led to partnership. Impossible odds had led to a new kind of civilization. A place where the rejected and the exiled found community. A place where humans and dragons worked together. A place where the future belonged not to those who followed rules blindly, but to those brave enough to break them. Station Omega was no longer just a refuge. It was a beacon. A symbol that change was possible. That new worlds could be built. That even in the cold emptiness of space life could flourish. And it had all started because one human refused to accept that saving a dragon's egg was impossible.